I appreciate him more than he knows, and I try to tell him that. Lewis relates to all that too. He and my husband, as we discussed in the discussion group this morning at 9 o'clock, they're a lot alike. They have the same traits. Last week, we appreciated so much the words of wisdom that Reverend Alice gave us. Thank you so very much, Reverend Alice. We appreciate you and the words you gave us. She talked about the fact that change is difficult, and we know that, don't we? Change is difficult. It's extremely difficult. We have all found the last couple of years to be extremely difficult, haven't we? And we will look back on it. In 10 years, we'll look back on this time and we'll see that the world had to stop at some point so that we could change who we are. That's very frequently how change comes, you know. Change is difficult, and thank you, Reverend Alice. We were laughing before the service because I didn't know what her topic was going to be. I hadn't asked. This was last Sunday, and we were in my office talking, and I laughed, and I said, well, you know, that's funny. This morning I was sitting there writing an article, and the title of the article was going to be, "That Was Then, This Is Now." And the concept and the thought behind it, and as a matter of fact, I am almost finished with that article, but was that we cannot put on the same shoes we had 50 years ago. Most of us. It won't work. The same clothing, sit in the same little chair we sat in as a child. Times change. That was then. This is now. And the sooner we get that, the more peaceful and happy we will be. There's no need to sit around grousing all the time about, well, when I was a kid, you know, I walked 50 miles to school. And look at these lazy youngsters now. Oh, come off it. We're tired of hearing that tired old stuff, aren't we? Those of us that are happiest, are most peaceful, we've given up that old story. And we don't need to carry it with us any longer. We need to be at peace. We need to love. That's who we are. And this morning I'm talking about how the river and how it flows is a perfect example of our lives. It starts out small. As a matter of fact, if you looked at where the mighty Mississippi starts, you'd be startled. It's a little trickle. But then all these streams and tributaries join it. And the next thing you know, it's huge. You can hardly even see across it. And the river flows, and it flows with power. And those that want to sail it or navigate it, they must learn how to navigate it, how it flows. And the first thing a sailor needs to learn is how to sail with the flow and with the wind and use it to your advantage instead of your disadvantage. So one morning in 1988, Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, the man who has spent his lifetime up until then amassing a huge fortune, an industrialist. He didn't really care about people. All he wanted to do was continue inventing, and sometimes inventing weapons and manufacturing weapons of mass destruction. He awoke one morning, got the newspaper, and saw his own obituary in it. Can you imagine? Wouldn't that have been shocking? Wouldn't you be shocked to pick up the Times-Picayune and you see your obituary in it? It'd be shocking, wouldn't it? Well, it turns out a reporter had gotten it wrong. It was actually his brother that had died. But the reporter that picked up on it wrote his obituary. Well, it got him to thinking, though, and he decided he didn't like the man he read about. Because what he read about in his obituary, that was all he had done with his life, was to create a fortune, to create weapons of mass destruction, and there wasn't one good thing that was said in that obituary about him. He decided right then and right there he was going to do something to change, because he wanted to be remembered well. He wanted to do something good for the world. So he decided to create the Nobel Peace Prize to honor those who strive for peace, who strive to do good things with their lives. And what a wonderful thing he did. But how it came about. It was one of those challenges that he could have just been angry about. He could have stewed over that forever without forgiving. He could have sued the newspaper. He probably could have gotten a bigger fortune. But he decided that was not what he wanted, because he decided he wanted to make the world a better place because he had lived. So if you were to read your own obituary today, let me ask you, what would it say? Just think about it and carry that thought with you this week. What would it say? We know what the obituary of some really fine people have said. We know that. We've heard, the Buddha, Krishna, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus. How many fine people have lived and left their mark on the world because they were here and they chose to live for love and light. And just like that river that starts small and becomes more broad as it goes, we start small. I don't know how many of you are parents and how, if you have had the experience of going to the child's elementary school to have a teacher-parent conference, and you're sitting in these tiny little chairs. And it gives you a broader perspective, doesn't it? Totally different perspective.
We all start small like that. And you know what, as we go along that river of life, hopefully, what we need to do, what we hope to do, is be growing, not only size-wise, that we're growing in maturity, in wisdom. We're growing spiritually. We're growing emotionally. Now, we all know some adults, and maybe some of them are close to us, who never grew up and never matured in one of those ways. Maybe they never matured emotionally, and so they get triggered easily by things other people say and do. But if we want to grow to be the best person we can be, we will continue growing emotionally, in wisdom, spirit, mental. How many of us have not grown past the need to be right? What we have going on is important that can ever admit being wrong, or that the other person might be right. Once you grow in wisdom and understanding, I think of those 12 powers that Charles Gilmore taught, and gave an example of faith and love, strength, wisdom, understanding, seeing. I think of the other side of the mind. I'll get back to them later. All of those things really tend to grow in our lives, and we will tend to be keeping balance. I asked my husband the other day, because my husband used to sail in college, and I know several people that I know, Frank and David, and so many people that sail. And I said, now what the term to keel over, where did that come from? And that's when you, of course, lose your balance and come to sail upside down. Anybody ever done that with their lives? We all have that. And what's happened when we do that, it's when we get out of balance, isn't it? Out of harmony, maybe emotionally, mentally, we won't let go of some old thought, some old way of thinking. We won't let it go. And the next thing we know, we come to over. There's so many snags along the way if you're traveling to live your life, and you know what? You won't know what's around the next bend. But as we gain faith and wisdom, we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that no matter what is up around the next bend, we will have the strength to endure it. Whatever it is, we will lose the fear. And either, they say, you either have faith or fear. And I've chosen, I actually haven't, I've said this all along, and not to do it in a bragging way, but since the pandemic started, I've continued to say, I'm going to do everything I can to stay safe. And I have. I've been cautious and done those things to make sure that I have vaccinated up and everything I needed to do and boosted too. But I never did fall into fear. And I thought about that as I looked around at the world and the fear that so many people had, and I wondered, what's the difference? Why? And it's simple, it's faith. I have faith that God is my instant, constant, and abundant supply, and honey, when I say it, I mean it. I mean that. I have faith. I have faith. not as much faith over in that guy that had the wheelbarrow last week you left us with, Reverend Alice. She left us teetering on the precipice of a mountain top with a guy with a wheelbarrow going across a tightrope and asking if we wanted to get in. And I thought, no. I have faith in a lot of things, but not that. But there are so many things that we do that do question our faith, and I have had faith all along, and I have not fallen on fear. I've just said, okay, like everything else in my life around that next bend, I will know what to do. I will know if there's something around that next corner that might feel frightening. I don't know what to do. And I'm not going to follow it. I'm going to conquer my fear. As Charles said this morning, we're going to sell witness. That was wonderful. I love that song. I love the other song. Beautiful, all of them. Beautiful. Excuse me. We continue to grow in our roles. Everything we do, if we are paying attention, and we want to, and we set our intention to be our best, we will continue to grow. I was dismayed the other day. I ran across an article where you're not going to believe this, really. There is a denomination, a Christian denomination, and they're actually debating whether it's a sin to get a tattoo. With all the things going on in the world, you're still talking about all that old stuff in Leviticus? You've got to be kidding me. Whether you could wear stripes and plaids together or something else that's ridiculous and it's going to be a sin. I thought all of us had come way beyond that. I used to hear that when I was a child, and I didn't believe that then. And the truth is, there's great wisdom
in the Hebrew Scriptures. There is great wisdom in the Christian Scriptures, but there's also a lot of nonsense, and we know that. Why is that? Well, what it is, it's collections of different writings, and remember now, these things were written down. These were stories, okay? Stories. For a long, 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 hundreds of years, thousands of years, these were stories, myths, that were finally written down by a scribe, finally, to the best of his memory. These weren't books that were written down by somebody, you know. Adam wrote this one, and then David wrote this one. Didn't happen that way. If you think it did, you better go do some research and study. I won't believe anything till I've researched it. Somebody will send me an article written by somebody saying he's a scientist and this, that, and the other. I'm not going to believe that till I read about this purported scientist and see what his background is. Pretty soon you'll find out he's gone down some rabbit hole. I'm not going to believe that. So if you have something you're reading every day and you haven't researched where it came from or who wrote it, I'd advise you to do that, especially if you're living your life by it and you're considering this a sin and that a sin. I'd say go do your homework. But the book of Leviticus especially, those were sayings of people. Listen, these were ancient people. Remember, they didn't have our scientific knowledge. They didn't know that the earth was round. They thought it was flat. They thought if they went to the edge, they'd fall off. Remember that when you're deciding if you want to live by some of those old rules. What did Jesus say? He said, you can't put new wine into old skins. That was then. This is now. And we're traveling down this river of life, hopefully gaining knowledge, gaining understanding, becoming better people because of it. If you grew up with believing in sin and salvation and that works for you, you do that. It doesn't work for me. A loving God would never, ever have created a system like that. Not the God I know, the God that's in my heart, right here, the one that loves me beyond measure, has sent me here to this very place. No. My God's a loving God, and He loves you too. He directs me down this river of life every single day. I love water, you know that. I've shared that with you so many times. Any sort of water, whether it's a creek or a river or a lake, the vast ocean. I remember a few years ago when I was up in Detroit, and I was on the river walk, and I don't know if you have been, any of you have been to Detroit, and if you haven't been to Detroit since they cleaned it up and since it's really beautiful and sparkling now. And I used to go pretty often there for a conference, a Unity conference, and I had walked along the river walk one day, and I was looking, I sat down on a bench there, and I was looking across the Detroit River, which was sparkling and beautiful. And I could see Canada, Windsor, just across the river. And I sat there and had like an epiphany, and just especially touched by God again. And I thought, what a beautiful world this is, what a wonderful life. And just like this river, we each have an opportunity every moment, every day, to keep flowing, seeing new territory, to gain speed if we want, or to slow down. Now I know that many of you have had setbacks. You've had situations that you thought you wouldn't overcome. And for a bit you might have gotten snagged up and stuck. But hopefully you didn't stay there too long. And you got back into the rhythm and the flow of life again. So I guess that the easiest thing or the best thing that we each could do would be to ask ourselves every day, who do I want to be when I come out to the end of this great river as it flows back into the universal waters of life? Who do I want to have become Is there a step I can take right now today? Just one step to become that person. Hubert Humphrey, a man with a real zest for living, once talked about the good old days. He said they were never that good, believe me. That's what my mother used to say. She never wanted to go back. Washing clothes the way she had to by hand, hanging them out. All the things that they had to do, going to the well for water in this kind of temperature. Not pleasant. Like he said, that they were never that good, believe me. I've always believed in the future. Always. Always. And I've always believed in things that are coming are good and for our best. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come. We wouldn't have chosen them. They wouldn't have shown up now. Why shouldn't we make friends with the future? We all should. We've all been given the gifts of God, those gifts, and they're being used for the best and the highest. I was intrigued by a story about a bishop in the 1870s. He had charge of a small denominational college, and annually he visited the school and stayed in the home of the president. He was a narrow thinker with a dim view of the future. He told the school president during one of those visits that everything that could be invented had already been invented. 1870s, okay? The administrator disagreed. He said, in 50 years, people will learn to fly like birds. That kind of talk greatly disturbed the bishop. He didn't like that a bit. He said, flight is reserved for birds and angels. And you, sir, are guilty of blasphemy. The name of the bishop was Milton Wright. That name may not have a great deal of meaning to you, but something else will. You see, back at home, he had two enthusiastic sons, Orville and Wilbur, who believed that they could fly. I hope that when you think of the past, you'll think of it lovingly. But think of it as that was then, this is now. And I thank you for your time.
And thank you, Reverend Judy, for your wisdom.